The night before my medical school interview, my stepsister poured industrial bleach directly down the front of my only professional blazer. When my father and stepmother told me to stop making a scene and wear the ruined jacket anyway, they had absolutely no idea they were handing me the exact key to their total destruction. I walked into the interview the next morning wearing that stained jacket with my head held high. The legendary dean of admissions stared at the bleached fabric, then looked down at my application. The color completely drained from his face as he read my last name. He dropped his expensive pen on the desk and whispered, "Wait, you are her. Your father told the medical board you died 16 years ago." Before I reveal how that single drop of bleach unraveled my family's multi-million-dollar empire, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever turned a family's cruelty into your greatest weapon. My name is Zuri Washington, and I am 26 years old. I currently work 80 grueling hours a week as a medical scribe at a busy clinic in Atlanta, Georgia. Growing up in the Washington household meant living my entire life in the suffocating shadow of my older half-sister Jada. Our family resided in a sprawling mansion in Buckhead, a neighborhood where social status meant absolutely everything, and appearances were guarded with ruthless precision. My father, Desmond Washington, was a man whose entire identity revolved around his public image and his perceived wealth. He demanded perfection from his children, or rather, he demanded perfection from Jada. I was simply the tragic mistake he felt obligated to hide from his country club friends. My biological mother passed away when I was very young, and soon after my father married Valerie. Valerie was a woman who mastered the art of psychological manipulation, ensuring her own biological daughter. Jada received every possible advantage in life, while I was treated as an unpaid servant in my own home. Jada is 28 now, parading around the internet as a wellness influencer. Her life is a carefully curated feed of expensive green juices, luxury yoga retreats, and sponsored posts. She contributes nothing of actual value to society, but in my father's eyes, she is an absolute star. Her husband, Connor Pierce, fit right into the toxic family dynamic. Connor is 30 years old, a white tech bro with an inflated ego and a desperate need to be viewed as a Silicon Valley visionary. He recently founded a medical technology startup called Nova Health, a venture funded entirely by my father's connections and Jada's influencer money. Connor treated me with a specific brand of cruel condescension, viewing my exhausting work at the clinic as a pathetic attempt to play doctor while he was supposedly revolutionizing the healthcare industry. It was a Tuesday evening, the night before my interview at one of the most prestigious medical schools in the country. I had spent years saving money studying until my eyes burned and working triple shifts just to afford my application fees. I possessed exactly one professional outfit. It was a tailored blazer I had cherished for years. The jacket originally belonged to my biological mother. When Valerie moved into our house, she had taken the pristine white blazer and coldly dyed it pitch black, claiming the original color was too flashy for a quiet child like me. I kept it anyway, holding on to the only physical piece of my mother I had left. I had just finished pressing the blazer and laid it carefully across the back of the dining room chair. I stepped into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. From the hallway, I heard the loud, obnoxious laughter of Connor and Jada entering the house. They were celebrating wildly. Connor had just secured a $5 million seed round for his startup, a feat my parents treated like a monumental triumph of human intellect. I walked back into the dining room just in time to see Jada holding a large cup of industrial bleach which she had supposedly been using to clean her pristine white designer sneakers. She looked directly at me, a malicious smirk playing on her lips, and deliberately tripped over the edge of the expensive Persian rug. The bleach splashed violently through the air, landing directly on the front of my black blazer. I lunged forward, letting out a sharp cry as the harsh chemicals soaked deep into the fabric. Jada did not even try to hide her satisfaction. She offered a fake, exaggerated gasp. "Oh no, Zuri, I am so clumsy today. You should really learn not to leave your cheap clothes lying around in the common areas." Connor stood in the doorway, crossing his arms and laughing openly. He looked at my horrified expression and shook his head in amusement. "Why are you crying over a cheap jacket, Zuri? You work as a scribe making minimum wage. Stop trying to look rich. It is embarrassing." My heart pounded wildly against my ribs. I grabbed the soaking fabric, running toward the laundry room to rinse it, but the damage was already done. The harsh chemicals were eating away at the black dye Valerie had forced upon the jacket over a decade ago. I could hear my father and Valerie descending the grand staircase drawn by the commotion. My father wore a tailored suit, a glass of expensive bourbon resting comfortably in his hand. "What is all this screaming about?" he demanded, his voice echoing aggressively in the large foyer. I held up the ruined blazer, my hands shaking with a toxic mix of devastation and absolute rage. "Jada just poured bleach all over my only interview outfit for tomorrow. I need this for my medical school interview." Valerie glided into the room, stepping carefully in her designer heels. She glanced at the jacket and rolled her eyes, her face a mask of supreme annoyance. "Stop being so dramatic, Zuri. Jada just helped secure a $5 million investment for Connor's company. She is exhausted and highly stressed. We are trying to celebrate a real achievement here, and you are throwing a tantrum over some raggedy piece of clothing." My father nodded in immediate agreement, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Your mother is right. You are acting completely ungrateful. Connor is building the future of medical technology, bringing real prestige to the Washington name. You are just going for an interview to be a glorified nurse. Wear the jacket anyway. Nobody is going to care what a scribe looks like." The injustice of his words hit me like a physical blow. They were completely dismissing my entire future, my years of backbreaking labor, just to protect Jada's fragile ego. I looked at the four of them standing together, a united front of toxicity and extreme arrogance. They genuinely believed I was beneath them, a worthless addition to their perfect family portrait. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing my tears fall. "I will wear it," I said quietly, clutching the damp fabric tightly to my chest. I turned and walked away, ignoring Connor's mocking chuckles echoing down the hallway behind me. I spent the entire night locked in my small, drafty bedroom at the back of the house, trying desperately to salvage the blazer. As I gently washed the bleached area in the bathroom sink, something miraculous began to happen. The bleach had completely neutralized the cheap black dye Valerie had used to hide the garment's true nature. As the dark, murky color washed down the drain, the original pristine white fabric of my mother's blazer emerged from the shadows. But that was not all. Hidden beneath the dark dye, rendered invisible for 16 long years, was an intricate embroidery positioned over the left breast pocket. I scrubbed the area carefully, my breath catching sharply in my throat as the silver threads gleamed brilliantly under the harsh bathroom light. The text was flawless and undeniably authoritative. It read, "The Helene Washington Medical Research Trust." My hands trembled violently as I traced the elegant letters. My biological mother, Dr. Helene Washington, had not just been a regular doctor. She had been a renowned pioneer, a woman of immense intelligence and incredible capability. My father had always told me she died penniless, leaving absolutely nothing behind but unpaid medical bills and immense debt. He constantly claimed he took me in out of the goodness of his own heart. But looking at the silver embroidery, a bright spark of realization ignited in my mind. The story I had been fed my entire life was a massive lie. The blazer was not just a piece of clothing. It was a formal uniform, a symbol of high authority and vast ownership. By trying to humiliate me, Jada had inadvertently stripped away the disguise Valerie had forced upon my mother's grand legacy. The bleach had washed away the lies, leaving only the undeniable truth staring back at me in silver thread. As the sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, casting a golden glow across my small bedroom, I carefully ironed the damp fabric. Every pass of the hot iron felt like a ritual of rebirth. For 26 years, I had accepted the narrative my father and Valerie had written for me. I had accepted the emotional abuse, the financial control, and the constant comparison to Jada. I had believed I was the burden, a medical scribe who should be eternally grateful for the scraps of affection they occasionally threw my way. But the silver threads of my mother's trust logo proved that my existence was not a burden. It was a threat to them. The $5 million seed round Connor was celebrating the luxury lifestyle Jada flaunted online, the mansion my father lorded over everyone. all of it was likely built on the foundation of my mother's hidden wealth. I folded the ironing board and slipped my arms into the blazer. The fabric felt like armor. I was no longer just Zuri, the exhausted scribe and family scapegoat. I was the daughter of Dr. Helene Washington, and I was about to walk into rooms they could only dream of entering. The next morning, I put on the restored blazer. The large white bleached area now looked like a deliberate striking design choice, highlighting the silver embroidery perfectly against the remaining dark fabric. I paired it with dark slacks and stood tall, feeling a strange, powerful surge of newfound confidence. I drove my beat-up sedan to the elite medical school campus, stepping into the grand administration building with my head held high and my shoulders pulled back. The waiting room was filled with privileged applicants, dressed in generic, expensive suits. I stood out immediately, but for the very first time in my life, I did not care what anyone thought. When my name was finally called, I was escorted down a long corridor into a massive wood-paneled office. Sitting behind a large, polished oak desk was Dr. Sterling, the legendary Dean of Admissions, and one of the most respected medical minds in the entire country. He was reviewing my file, his expression strictly neutral and highly professional. "Have a seat, Miss Washington," he said without looking up from the papers. I sat down smoothly, smoothing the front of my blazer and waiting patiently. Dr. Sterling finally raised his head to address me. His eyes immediately locked onto the silver embroidery resting on my chest. The professional mask on his face shattered instantly. He went incredibly pale, his eyes darting wildly from the logo to my face, tracing the undeniable physical similarities I shared with my mother. He slowly lowered the file onto his desk. The room was so quiet I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock standing in the corner. His hand began to shake slightly as he dropped his expensive fountain pen. It clattered loudly against the polished wood surface, sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. "Wait," he whispered, leaning forward across the desk, as if he were seeing a ghost manifest right in front of his eyes. "You are Helene's daughter." I nodded, confused by his intensely emotional reaction. "Yes, sir, my mother was Dr. Helene Washington." Dr. Sterling stood up abruptly, pushing his heavy leather chair back with a loud screech. But that is completely impossible." He breathed out, his voice a mixture of profound shock and dawning horror. "Desmond told the medical board you died at age 10. He submitted the death certificate himself. He told all of us that Jada was the sole surviving heir to Helene's entire $20 million estate." What an incredible twist in your story so far. It sounds like you are uncovering some massive secrets. Have you ever discovered a long, hidden family secret that changed everything for you? Let me know your experience in the comments below. The air in the room grew heavy and cold as Dr. Sterling's words hung between us. Dead at age 10. I stared at him, unable to fully process the magnitude of the betrayal. My father had literally erased my existence on paper. Dr. Sterling walked over to a locked filing cabinet, his hands still shaking slightly. He pulled out a thick manila folder and laid it on the desk in front of me. It was a copy of my mother's estate documents and a death certificate from a county in Nevada. The certificate bore my name, Zuri Washington, listing my cause of death as a severe respiratory infection. I looked at the date. It was issued just weeks after my mother passed away. My father and Valerie had orchestrated a massive legal fiction in a completely different state while keeping me isolated and homeschooled in Georgia during my early years. They bypassed my mother's ironclad will, which had explicitly placed her entire $20 million estate and her intellectual property into a protected trust for me. Because I was legally dead in the eyes of the trust executors, the assets automatically defaulted to my father and subsequently to his newly adopted daughter, Jada. Dr. Sterling sat heavily in his chair, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. "Your mother was a pioneer, Zuri. Helene was decades ahead of her time in artificial intelligence diagnostics. She was developing an algorithm that could predict complex autoimmune failures years before physical symptoms appeared. She trusted your father to manage the legal side of her patents. That was her only mistake." I did not cry. I had shed all my tears for this family years ago. Instead, a cold, calculating clarity settled over my mind. Dr. Sterling turned his computer monitor toward me. He opened a presentation file. The title slide read, Nova Health Series A Funding Pitch. Connor Pierce, Chief Executive Officer. Sterling explained that Connor had approached the medical board last week seeking institutional backing for his new medical tech startup. Connor claimed he had single-handedly developed a revolutionary diagnostic algorithm. As Sterling scrolled through the slides, my blood turned to ice. The schematics, the data flow models, the neural network architecture. It was all incredibly familiar. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the lines of code displayed on a technical slide. It was not just similar to my mother's work, it was her exact code. I remembered sitting next to my mother in her home office when I was 16 years old. She had secretly taught me to code, sharing her brilliant mind with me when my father was not looking. I had helped her debug the final iteration of that exact algorithm just months before she died. We had even left a hidden developer note buried deep within the source code, a small inside joke between mother and daughter. Connor had not changed a single line. I was parading my mother's genius around Silicon Valley venture capitalists, pretending he was a visionary. Does he even know how it works? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Sterling shook his head. Not in the slightest. When the medical board asked him basic questions about the machine learning parameters, he deflected and used generic tech buzzwords. He is a fraud, Zuri. A dangerous fraud who is about to secure millions of dollars using stolen technology. They stole your life, your mother's legacy, and your future. I looked down at the white blazer, my mother's emblem resting proudly on my chest. What do we do now? I asked. Dr. Sterling picked up his phone. He did not call campus security or the police. He called someone much more dangerous. I am making a call to a former student of mine, he said. He owes me his life, and he happens to be the most ruthless corporate attorney on the East Coast. 30 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the office opened. A tall, imposing black man walked in carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He wore a custom suit and an expression that suggested he destroyed corporate empires before breakfast. My name is Malik, he said, extending a hand to me. I specialize in Securities and Exchange Commission violations and white-collar crime. Dr. Sterling gave me the short version on the drive over. If what you are saying is true, your father and brother-in-law have committed multiple federal offenses, including wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Malik opened his briefcase and pulled out a clean laptop. He asked me to verify certain aspects of the code and the timeline of the forged death certificate. As I laid out the details, Malik's sharp eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. We are not just going to sue them, Zuri, he said, his voice low and dangerous. A civil suit takes years and they will just hide the money offshore. We are going to build an airtight federal indictment. We are going to let them inflate the value of Nova Health, and then we are going to drop a tactical nuke on their entire operation. But to do that, I need absolute proof that they are actively trying to silence you. I need you to go back to that house and play the role of the defeated, broken daughter. Malik handed me a tiny wireless earpiece no larger than a grain of rice and a small button camera that easily attached to the lapel of my blazer. I need eyes and ears inside that mansion, Malik explained. Your father and stepmother think you are just a helpless scribe. They are arrogant, and arrogant people get sloppy. Go home and let them offer you whatever miserable scraps they think will keep you quiet. Do not fight back, just listen. I left the medical school campus feeling like a completely different person. I was no longer a victim. I was an undercover operative in my own life. I drove my beat-up sedan back to the sprawling Buckhead mansion. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. I took a deep breath, slipping the earpiece in and ensuring the lapel camera was active. I walked through the grand front doors, letting my shoulders slump and arranging my face into an expression of utter defeat. The house was quiet, but I could hear voices coming from the formal living room. Valerie was sitting on the velvet sofa, sipping a glass of expensive champagne. Jada was lounging in a chair nearby, admiring her massive diamond engagement ring. When Valerie saw me enter, she set her glass down with a soft clink. Well, look who decided to show her face, she drawled, her tone dripping with toxic condescension. Did the medical school laugh you out of the building in that ruined jacket? I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, playing my part perfectly. The interview did not go well, I murmured softly. Valerie smiled a genuine smile of pure malice. Of course it did not go well, Zuri. You are simply not cut out for that world. You lack the pedigree and the intellect. But your father and I are generous people. We know you are struggling to pay your rent and keep your little car running. Valerie reached over to the marble coffee table and picked up a thick stack of legal documents. She tossed them carelessly onto the glass table directly in front of me. It was a 20-page document filled with dense legal jargon. I looked down at the title. It read Minor Family Liability Waiver and Non-Disclosure Agreement. Your father had his lawyers draft this up this morning, Valerie explained casually. It is just a standard family agreement stating that you will not discuss our private family matters online or with the press. Connor is taking his company public soon, and we cannot have a disgruntled, unstable relative making up stories for attention. Sign it, and I will transfer $1,000 into your checking account right now. You can go buy yourself a new blazer and maybe a decent meal. Jada snickered, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Take the money, Zuri. It is more than you make in a week at that depressing clinic. You should be thanking us on your knees. I stared at the thick document. The wording was deliberately confusing, but the core message was clear. It was a blanket waiver designed to strip me of any future rights to sue the family for emotional or financial distress. It was an ironclad gag order purchased for the pathetic sum of $1,000. My blood boiled at the sheer disrespect, but I kept my face perfectly still. In my right ear, Malik's voice crackled softly through the hidden earpiece. Read the second paragraph on page 4, Zuri. Do it slowly so the camera can capture the text. I picked up the document, flipping to the fourth page and pretending to read it with confusion. The paragraph explicitly stated that I relinquished all claims to any intellectual property currently or previously held by any member of the Washington family. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to retroactively protect Connor's stolen algorithm by forcing me to sign away my rights before I even knew I had them. This seems like a lot of paperwork just for family privacy, I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to sound thoroughly intimidated. Valerie sighed loudly, standing up and walking toward me. She snatched a gold pen from her purse and shoved it into my hand. Do not try to play lawyer, Zuri. You are giving me a headache. We are offering you free money out of pity. If you do not sign it right now, pack your bags and get out of this house forever. We will cut off your phone and cancel your health insurance today. The threat hung in the air, heavy and cruel. They were leveraging my basic survival needs to secure their stolen millions. I looked at the pen, then at the signature line. I felt a momentary flash of hesitation. If I signed this, was I truly giving away my mother's legacy? Then Malik's voice cut through the silence in my ear, steady, calm, and absolutely lethal. Sign it, Zuri. Let them think they won. This document is totally unenforceable because it is predicated on a fraudulent death certificate. More importantly, the threat Valerie just made on camera constitutes criminal extortion. Sign it. It is the exact proof of coercion we need for the federal indictment. I gripped the gold pen tightly. I looked up at Valerie's smug, expectant face and Jada's bored expression. I lowered my head, putting the pen to the paper. I signed my name with deliberate, careful strokes. I signed away my silence. I signed away my rights. But deep down, I knew I was actually signing their arrest warrants. I handed the document back to Valerie. She snatched it away with a triumphant smirk, completely unaware that the countdown to her absolute destruction had just begun. Valerie folded the document carefully and slipped it into her designer handbag. She looked at me as if I were a stain on her expensive rug. Go to your room, Zuri, she commanded. We are leaving for the country club in an hour. Jada is nominated for Philanthropist of the Year, and we cannot have you lingering around the house bringing down the mood. I nodded silently, turning my back on them and walking slowly up the grand staircase. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I kept my posture completely defeated. For the next hour, I sat in my dark, drafty room, listening to the sounds of stolen wealth echoing through the mansion. I heard Jada complaining loudly about her makeup artist refusing to accept that her fake influencer persona required a team of professionals just to make her presentable. I heard Connor loudly taking a phone call, bragging to someone about his upcoming series of funding round. He sounded so incredibly arrogant, so utterly convinced of his own genius. I waited patiently in the shadows. In my ear, Malik kept a steady, calming presence. He told me to breathe, to let them get completely off the property before I made a single move. Finally, I heard the heavy oak front door slam shut. The tires of my father's luxury SUV crunched on the gravel driveway, fading into the distance. The mansion fell dead silent. "The coast is clear," Malik whispered in my earpiece. "You have exactly 3 hours before the gala ends. Get into his office and find the source code." I slipped out of my room and moved silently down the carpeted hallway. Connor's home office was located in the east wing of the house. It was a massive room designed entirely to stroke his fragile tech bro ego. He had set up multiple curved monitors, an expensive ergonomic chair, and framed articles about his fake startup on the walls. It was all a pathetic facade built on the bones of my mother's life work. I sat down in his chair and woke up his primary computer. Connor was incredibly lazy. His desktop password was just Jada and the year they got married. I typed it in, and the screen unlocked immediately. Finding the medical diagnostic algorithm was the priority. Connor had placed it in a supposedly secure hidden folder on his hard drive. He had used standard commercial encryption software to protect it, thinking it made him look like a sophisticated developer. He did not realize that the core code he was protecting had its own foundational architecture built by my mother. I opened the terminal window on his computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It had been 10 years since I sat next to my mother writing code, but muscle memory took over completely. My mother had always built a failsafe into her major projects. It was a backdoor access sequence disguised as a redundant memory loop. She called it the ghost key. I typed the sequence of commands my mother had taught me all those years ago. As the green text scrolled across the black terminal screen, a profound wave of grief and pride washed over me. I was directly communicating with the ghost of my mother. The encryption software Connor had installed simply bypassed itself, recognizing the original creator's override command. A massive directory opened on the screen. It was everything. Every single file, every dataset, every neural network pathway my mother had spent her life creating. I clicked on the core algorithm file. There at the very top of the source code were the original developer notes. Connor had not even bothered to scrub them from the hidden layers. He was simply too ignorant to understand how to access the deepest architecture of the code. I stared at the screen as hot tears finally pricked my eyes. The text read, authored by Dr. Helene Washington and Zuri Washington. The timestamp was dated 10 years ago. It was absolute, undeniable proof of intellectual property theft. Connor had stolen this entire empire from a dead woman and a 16-year-old girl. "I have the files," I whispered into the empty room. Malik's voice crackled back instantly. "Plug in the encrypted flash drive I gave you. Download everything. We need every single byte of data to present to the Securities and Exchange Commission." I pulled the small silver drive from my pocket and inserted it into the computer. The transfer window popped up, estimating a 20-minute download time. The files were massive, containing millions of data points mapping human disease progression. While the files downloaded slowly across the screen, I realized simply taking the code back was not enough. Connor was planning to take his fraudulent company public. He was going to stand on a stage and present my mother's genius as his own, to secure millions in federal and private funding. I needed to ensure he fell from the highest possible height. I opened the core execution file of the algorithm. "I am going to leave him a present," I told Malik, my voice dropping to a low whisper. "I am writing a logic bomb into the simulation protocol." "What exactly does that mean?" Malik asked, sounding genuinely curious through the earpiece. I let my fingers fly across the keyboard, weaving a new sequence into the complex tapestry of my mother's code. "Connor does not know how this software processes live data," I explained quietly. "He only knows how to run the pre-programmed simulation for investors. I am inserting a dormant bug, a Trojan horse. It will remain completely invisible during his routine tests. But if he attempts to run a live high-capacity diagnostic simulation, the bug will trigger a cascade failure. The system will not just crash, It will publicly display the original source code and the developer notes on whatever screen he is using. It will expose his fraud to the entire room. You are a dangerous woman, Zuri Washington. Malik chuckled softly in my ear. Just make sure you get out of there clean. I watched the download progress bar slowly creeping toward 90%. The house was still completely silent. I double-checked the logic bomb, ensuring it was perfectly integrated into the neural network framework, so Connor's generic virus scans would never detect it. My mother's legacy was now armed and ready to detonate. The progress bar hit 95%. I was calculating how many seconds were left when a sharp noise shattered the quiet of the mansion. It was the distinct, heavy thud of the front door being thrown open. My heart stopped. I froze in the ergonomic chair staring at the screen. The transfer was at 97%. I heard heavy footsteps in the marble foyer downstairs. It was Connor. His voice echoed up the grand staircase, loud and frantic. "Jada, I do not care about the philanthropy award," he yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The venture capitalists just called me. They moved the timeline up. They demand a live demonstration of the software tomorrow night at the gala. If I do not prep the simulation right now, we lose the $5 million. I heard him marching toward the stairs. His heavy footsteps pounded against the hardwood steps, growing louder and closer by the second. The download hit 98%. I reached for the flash drive, praying for it to finish, as the shadow of my brother-in-law fell across the hallway outside the office door. 99%. 100%. The transfer complete notification flashed across the screen just a fraction of a second before the heavy oak door swung violently open. I yanked the silver flash drive from the USB port and dropped instantly to the carpeted floor, shoving the drive deep into my pocket. I grabbed a discarded coffee mug from beside the desk just as Connor burst into the room, his face flushed red with panic and greed. He stopped short, staring down at me, crouching under his desk. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice cracking with stress. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes lowered, holding the empty mug like a shield. "Valerie told me to gather the dirty dishes before the cleaning staff arrives tomorrow," I murmured, keeping my voice completely submissive. Connor ran a hand through his hair, not even glancing at his computer screen. "Just get out of here," he snapped, pushing past me to fall into his ergonomic chair. "I have a massive demonstration to prep, and I cannot have the help hovering around my office." I scurried out of the room, pulling the door shut behind me. As I walked down the long hallway, I tapped my earpiece. "We got it, Malik," I whispered. Every single line of code. The next evening, the mansion was transformed into a staging ground for my father's ultimate performance. Desmond was hosting an exclusive dinner party for the venture capitalists who were considering funding Connor's fraudulent company. The dining room table was set with fine china and crystal glasses, reflecting the light from the massive chandelier overhead. The air smelled of expensive catered food and desperation. Valerie found me in the kitchen earlier that afternoon and shoved a stiff black serving uniform into my chest. "You are going to make yourself useful tonight, Zuri," she commanded, her eyes glittering with malice. "The catering staff is short-handed, and since you live under our roof for free, you are going to serve the investors. I want you pouring wine and clearing plates." I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to parade me in front of some of the wealthiest men in Atlanta to prove a point. She wanted to show them that while Jada was married to a brilliant tech visionary, I was nothing more than the family failure, fit only to serve them their dinner. I took the uniform without a word. In my ear, Malik was already listening. "Let her play her little games, Zuri," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "Tonight is about setting the trap. Let Connor build himself up as high as he possibly can. The harder he flexes, the faster he falls." I put on the uniform, pulling my hair back into a tight bun. As the guests began to arrive, I carried trays of hors d'oeuvres through the grand foyer, keeping my head down. There were 4 investors in total, older white men in bespoke suits who spoke in loud, booming voices about market shares and disruptive technology. The lead investor was a man named Richard Clayton, a notorious venture capitalist known for being ruthless with his investments. My father greeted them with open arms, pouring them top-shelf bourbon and laughing at their terrible jokes. Jada floated around the room in a designer dress, playing the perfect supportive wife, while secretly live streaming the elegant setup to her fake followers. When it was time for dinner, I stood quietly in the corner of the dining room, waiting for Valerie's sharp hand gestures directing me to pour water or clear salad plates. The conversation inevitably turned to Connor and his supposedly groundbreaking algorithm. Connor leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive wine, looking incredibly smug. It is all about disrupting the traditional diagnostic pathways, he bragged loudly. Nova Health is going to completely eliminate the need for human guesswork in early-stage autoimmune detection. We are talking about a total paradigm shift in modern medicine. Richard Clayton cut into his steak, looking intrigued but analytical. It sounds incredibly promising, Connor, but medical AI is a crowded field. What makes your algorithm so different from the predictive models currently being tested at Johns Hopkins or Mayo Clinic? Connor smiled a greasy, arrogant smile. Because my code does not just learn from past data, it anticipates cellular degradation in real time. He gestured toward me as I approached the table to refill their wine glasses. Take my poor sister-in-law Zuri here, for example. She works grueling shifts as a medical scribe. It is a noble job, but let us be honest, it is low-level manual data entry. She spends hours typing up symptoms that doctors barely have time to read. My technology will make jobs like hers completely obsolete, liberating the medical field from human error and low-tier workers. I stood right beside Connor, pouring a deep red Cabernet into his crystal glass. The sheer audacity of his words burned in my chest. He was using me as a prop, a symbol of incompetence to elevate his own stolen genius. My father nodded vigorously from the head of the table. Exactly right, Connor. We have always tried to push Zuri to achieve more, but some people are just meant to follow instructions, while others are meant to lead the world. Jada giggled softly, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. Malik's voice hummed in my earpiece. Now Zuri, take him down. I finished pouring the wine and took a small, deliberate step back, but I did not leave the table. I looked directly at Richard Clayton, and then turned my gaze to Connor. My voice was soft, innocent, and completely devoid of any malice. That sounds absolutely fascinating, Connor, I said, tilting my head like a curious child. I am just a scribe, so I do not know much about technology, but I was typing up some notes for a neurologist today, and it made me wonder about your software. Valerie shot me a lethal glare, warning me to shut my mouth, but Richard Clayton raised an eyebrow, looking amused. Go ahead, Zuri, he said, his deep voice cutting through Valerie's silent threat. What is your question? I looked Connor dead in the eyes. I was just wondering how your neural network manages the recursive feedback loops during a live diagnostic simulation. Autoimmune diseases often present with compounding variables, so if the algorithm is predicting cellular degradation in real time, how do you prevent the deep learning model from overfitting the data and crashing the server load? Do you partition the heuristic processing, or did you write a custom bypass for the memory leak? The dining room went completely dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the central air conditioning. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. Valerie looked like she had just been slapped across the face. Jada stopped recording on her phone. Connor stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The smug, arrogant smile had entirely vanished from his face, replaced by a look of absolute sheer terror. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He looked at Richard Clayton, then back at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The silence stretched on, becoming incredibly heavy and suffocating. Well, Connor, Richard Clayton prompted, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. The scribe asked a very good question. How exactly are you handling the recursive feedback loops? We had a similar issue with a biotech firm we funded last year, and it cost us millions. I would love to hear how you solved the memory leak. Connor began to sweat. I could physically see a bead of perspiration roll down the side of his temple. He tugged at the collar of his expensive dress shirt, suddenly looking like a trapped animal. Well, you see, the thing about the feedback loops is that we use a very robust cloud infrastructure. He stammered, his voice shaking noticeably. The algorithms are synergized in a way that maximizes the blockchain integration. So the server load is basically optimized by the AI itself. It was absolute word salad, a desperate, pathetic string of technology buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. Richard Clayton was a veteran investor. He knew instantly that he was listening to a man who had no idea what he was talking about. Clayton's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from intrigued to deeply skeptical. He set his fork down on his plate. "You use blockchain to prevent a neural network memory leak," he asked, his tone dripping with sudden cold disdain. "That does not make any sense, Connor. Those are two completely different architectural environments. Are you telling me you do not know how the core processing of your own software functions?" Connor's face turned beet red. "No, no, of course I know how it functions," he stuttered wildly, waving his hands. "It is just highly technical, and our proprietary secrets are closely guarded. We outsource the data partitioning to a very secure framework." Jada could sense the millions of dollars slipping through her fingers. Her fake influencer composure completely shattered. She slammed her hands flat on the dining room table, making the silverware rattle. She glared at me, her eyes wide with unhinged fury. "Why are you even opening your mouth?" she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You are just a server tonight. Get back into the kitchen right now and stop trying to embarrass my husband with your stupid internet questions. You are ruining everything." Her outburst destroyed whatever illusion of a perfect, sophisticated family they were trying to project. The investors exchanged highly uncomfortable glances. Richard Clayton stood up, throwing his cloth napkin onto his half-eaten steak. "I think we have heard enough for one evening, Desmond," he said, buttoning his suit jacket. "We will review the prospectus, but to be perfectly honest, Connor, if you cannot answer a basic architectural question from a medical scribe, I have serious doubts about your ability to lead a tech company. Thank you for dinner, Valerie. We know our way out." The four wealthy men walked out of the dining room, leaving a trail of absolute devastation in their wake. The heavy front door clicked shut. The silence that followed was terrifying. I stood near the corner of the room, holding my serving tray, keeping my face perfectly blank. My father stood up slowly. His massive frame seemed to block out the light in the room. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He walked toward me, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. He did not say a word until he was standing inches from my face. Then he reached out and grabbed my upper arm, his large fingers digging painfully into my skin. "You think you are so smart," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous growl. "You think you can sabotage this family in my own house. I let you live here out of charity, and you pull a stunt like this to ruin your sister's future. Let go of me," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I did not pull a stunt. I asked a simple question about the company he claims he built. If he is a genius, he should have been able to answer it." My father shook me slightly, his grip tightening. "You listen to me, you pathetic little failure," he spat, the words hitting my face. "You are done. I am going to ruin your miserable life. I know every hospital administrator in the South. I am going to make a few phone calls tomorrow morning, and I am going to have you blacklisted from every medical facility in this state. You will never work in medicine again. You will not even be able to mop the floors of a clinic by the time I am done with you. Pack your trash and get out of my house tonight." Valerie stood behind him, her arms crossed, nodding in vicious agreement. "You brought this on yourself, Zuri. Do not expect a single dime from us ever again." I looked at my father's red, angry face. I looked at Jada, who was busy comforting a sweating, panicked Connor. I looked at Valerie, who thought she had finally won. I did not cry. I did not beg for forgiveness. I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of peace wash over my entire body. I gently but firmly pried my father's fingers off my arm. I reached up and unpinned the cheap black catering apron from my uniform, letting it fall uselessly to the dining room floor. I picked up my small tote bag from the counter. I looked directly into my father's eyes and allowed a slow, genuine smile to spread across my face. "Do not worry about my housing, Dad," I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You are going to need to worry about your own by next Friday." I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back as I walked through the grand foyer and out the heavy front doors into the cool night air. I left them standing there in the ruins of their ruined dinner party, completely oblivious to the massive storm that was about to destroy their entire world. I drove away from the Buckhead mansion, and my hands were completely steady on the steering wheel. I watched the heavy iron gates close in my rearview mirror, and I knew I would never step foot on that property again as a victim. I drove straight through the dark Atlanta streets, heading toward a secure location Malik had texted me earlier that evening. It was a luxury high-rise building in Midtown, a towering structure of glass and steel that overlooked the entire city skyline. When I pulled my old sedan into the brightly lit underground parking garage, Malik was already there waiting patiently next to a sleek black town car. He handed me a heavy metal keycard. "Welcome home, Zuri," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet concrete structure. I looked at the keycard, feeling deeply confused. "I cannot afford to live in a place like this," I told him, my voice tight with worry. "My bank account barely has enough money to cover my gas and groceries for the next week." Malik smiled, a sharp predator smile that made him look incredibly dangerous. "You do not have to pay for it, Zuri," he explained. "Your mother already did." I went on to explain a brilliant legal maneuver. While my father had successfully blocked my access to the main $20 million trust, he had completely missed a secondary emergency fund. My biological mother had set it up with a private offshore executor specifically dedicated to my housing and physical safety in case of a catastrophic life event. Because I was declared legally dead in the state of Georgia, my father thought he had swept all the financial assets. But Malik had contacted the offshore executor directly and provided my recent DNA test results along with verified fingerprint identification. The emergency fund was immediately unfrozen, bypassing my father's control entirely. The apartment on the 40th floor was an absolute fortress, paid in full for the next 5 years. I rode the private elevator up and stepped into my new reality. The penthouse was simply breathtaking. It featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the bustling city below. It had a gorgeous modern kitchen, sleek hardwood floors, and a state-of-the-art smart security system. For the very first time in 16 agonizing years, I felt completely safe and utterly untouchable. I slept that night in a massive, comfortable bed, feeling the heavy burden of my family's abuse finally lifting off my shoulders. The next morning, Malik arrived with a dedicated team of paralegals. They set up a literal war room in my spacious living area, dragging in whiteboards and connecting encrypted laptops to the secure internet network. It was time to file the whistleblower report. I handed Malik the silver flash drive containing the entire original source code of my mother's algorithm. For the next 48 hours, we barely slept. We meticulously mapped out every single lie Connor had told to his investors during his fraudulent pitch meetings. We matched the developer notes and timestamps from my mother's original code to the fake technical documents Connor had submitted to the medical board. We built a timeline showing exactly when he claimed to have invented the software, proving it was physically impossible. Malik drafted a massive, airtight federal complaint. This was not a simple civil lawsuit for damages. This was a direct priority tip to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We detailed Connor's wire fraud, outlining how he deliberately crossed state lines to solicit millions of dollars from investors using stolen intellectual property. We documented the identity theft and provided copies of the forged death certificate my father had signed to illegally transfer the primary trust assets to Jada. As I read over the final document, I felt a profound sense of righteous justice. We were not just exposing a petty family lie. We were completely dismantling a highly organized criminal enterprise. Malik hit the submit button on his encrypted server, sending the massive file directly to the highest levels of the federal government. "The trap is officially set," he told me, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his tired eyes. Now we wait for them to realize they are bleeding." It did not take long for the absolute panic to set in back at the mansion. By day 3, Jada realized I was actually gone for good, and that Connor was walking around the house like a terrified ghost. The dinner party disaster had thoroughly spooked the venture capitalists, and Connor was desperate to save his $5 million seed round. Jada, being the superficial narcissist she was, decided the best defense against her crumbling reality was a massive public offense. She took to Instagram and TikTok, launching a highly coordinated, vicious smear campaign to her millions of fake wellness followers. I watched the live stream from the comfort of my penthouse living room, feeling absolutely disgusted by her performance. Jada was sitting on her pristine white sofa, wearing oversized sweatpants and no makeup to make herself look fragile and vulnerable. She forced tears to well up in her eyes, looking directly into the camera lens with a practiced pout. "Hey guys," she sniffled, wiping a perfectly placed fake tear from her cheek. "I normally keep my family life super private, but I have to speak my truth today because I am just so heartbroken. My half-sister Zuri has been struggling with severe mental instability for years. My family and my amazing hardworking husband Connor have done absolutely everything to support her. We gave her a loving home and paid for her medical care, but she has completely lost touch with reality. Now she is trying to extort our loving family, threatening to make up horrible, nasty lies about Connor's beautiful new medical startup, just because she is deeply jealous of my happiness and success. Please send prayers for my family." The comments section flooded immediately with thousands of rabid followers offering her blind sympathy and viciously attacking my character. They called me a greedy gold digger, a toxic psychopath, and a pathetic burden who was trying to ruin a perfect marriage. Jada continued to weave her intricate web of lies, claiming I had run away and joined a dangerous group of criminals who were plotting to steal her hard-earned money. She begged her followers to send her positive energy during this dark, traumatic time in her life. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was preemptively destroying my credibility in the public eye, so that when the truth about the stolen code finally came out, the public would automatically assume I was just a crazy, jealous sister seeking revenge. But her fake crying video had a very real and very dangerous side effect that she likely intended all along. Her rabid internet fans decided to take matters into their own hands to protect their favorite influencer. Within hours of the video going live, they had scoured the internet searching for my digital footprint. I had practically no social media presence, but one of my old nursing school applications was unfortunately tied to my current phone number and email address. Through a series of dark web searches and illegal background checks, her followers managed to track down the location ping of my cell phone. They doxed me. My new highly secure address was posted in a private Discord server dedicated to Jada's toxic wellness cult. I watched in growing horror as Malik's cybersecurity team showed me the dark web chatter on their monitors. People were threatening to come to my building to teach me a lesson. Connor saw the leaked address online and decided to use the opportunity to play the tough guy. I was absolutely terrified of what I might have taken from his computer that night, and he wanted to intimidate me into total silence. Connor hired a team of private security contractors, essentially highly paid corporate thugs, to visit my building. He sent them to scare me into signing another non-disclosure agreement or physically taking back whatever hard drives I had in my possession. He honestly thought because he was a wealthy white tech founder, he could just send armed goons to terrorize a black woman in her own home without facing any consequences. I sat on my plush living room sofa, watching the building's security camera feed on my laptop screen. Malik had tapped into the lobby cameras, giving us a clear, uninterrupted view of the ground floor. My heart beat a little faster as a large black SUV pulled up to the front glass doors of my high-rise building. 4 massive men dressed in dark tactical suits stepped out of the vehicle. They looked incredibly intimidating, carrying heavy metal briefcases and walking with absolute aggressive purpose. They pushed rudely past the friendly doorman flashing some sort of fake corporate identification badge and marched directly toward the private elevator banks that led up to my penthouse suite. I felt a brief, terrible moment of panic, wondering if the building security doors would be strong enough to hold them back. Malik placed a reassuring, steady hand on my shoulder. "Just watch the screen, Zuri," he said, his voice radiating total calm control. "I told you we sent that whistleblower file to the absolute highest levels. They are not going to let anyone tamper with their star witness." Before Connor's corporate thugs could even reach their hands out to press the button for the elevator, the revolving glass doors of the lobby spun open again. 6 men and women walked briskly into the building. They were not wearing tactical gear or trying to look intimidating. They were wearing cheap, ill-fitting government suits and sensible shoes. They moved with a quiet, devastating authority that immediately sucked all the air out of the grand lobby. They walked straight up to Connor's private security team, physically blocking their path to the elevator bank. I watched the silent, tense confrontation play out on the high-definition security feed. The lead government agent, a tall woman with a severe haircut, pulled a gold badge from her jacket pocket and held it right up to the face of Connor's lead thug. Even without audio, I could see the exact beautiful moment the corporate security team realized they had made a massive, catastrophic mistake. The arrogant thugs immediately backed away, raising their hands in a gesture of total absolute surrender. They slowly backed out of the lobby, tripping over their own feet, and retreated to their black SUV, fleeing the scene like frightened children who had just been caught stealing. Malik's secure cell phone buzzed loudly on the glass coffee table. He picked it up and put it on speakerphone so I could hear. A crisp, professional voice echoed in my quiet living room. "Mr. Malik, this is Special Agent Harris with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working in conjunction with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have successfully intercepted the hostile parties at your client's location. The threat is neutralized." Malik smiled a genuine, warm smile, looking right at me. "Thank you, Agent Harris. Is our filing officially registered in the system?" "Yes, sir," the agent replied, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "Based on the mountain of digital evidence provided in your whistleblower report, including the undeniable proof of intellectual property theft and wire fraud, the federal judge signed the authorization exactly 5 minutes ago. The SEC probe is officially active, and we are moving directly into the next phase of the investigation. Please ensure Miss Washington remains at the secure location." The call disconnected, leaving a heavy, triumphant silence in the room. Connor actually thought he could send monsters to my door to silence me, but he had no idea I was already sitting firmly behind the protection of the federal government. His fake, fragile empire was officially under a federal microscope, and there was absolutely no way for him to hide the stolen code now. The quiet investigation had officially begun, and the entire Washington family was about to lose everything they had ever stolen from me. For the next 3 days, the silence from the federal government was absolutely deafening. Malik explained that the Securities and Exchange Commission did not move fast. They moved with absolute devastating precision. They spent those 72 hours quietly freezing low-level assets and securing digital warrants before they ever knocked on a single door. I stayed in my secure penthouse watching the skyline and working with Dr. Sterling to prepare my formal application for medical school. I was no longer a medical scribe fighting for scraps. I was the heir to a medical empire getting ready to reclaim my throne. On Thursday morning, the federal agents finally struck. They did not use flashing lights or loud sirens. Malik had an informant inside Nova Health who gave us the play-by-play as it happened. 3 unmarked sedans pulled up to the sleek glass headquarters of Connor's fake technology startup. Men and women in plain gray suits walked calmly through the sliding doors and handed thick manila envelopes directly to the front desk receptionists and the executive board members. At the exact same time, a separate team of federal agents walked right onto the private golf course of the Buckhead Country Club. They approached my father Desmond while he was right in the middle of his backswing and handed him a federal subpoena for financial fraud and criminal forgery. The fallout was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. Malik had tapped into the metadata of their cell phones, and we watched the frantic call logs lighting up our monitors like a fireworks display. My father called Connor 14 times in 10 minutes. Connor called his offshore accountants. Jada called her public relations manager, begging for a crisis strategy to protect her fake wellness brand. The pristine image of the wealthy, successful Washington family shattered into a million jagged pieces before lunchtime. Later that evening, Malik's surveillance team intercepted a massive screaming match inside the Buckhead mansion. The perfect family was completely eating itself alive. Desmond blamed Connor entirely, screaming that his sloppy, incompetent business practices had brought the federal government to their front door. Connor screamed right back, pointing out that Desmond was the one who forged the death certificate 16 years ago. Jada started crying hysterically, blaming Connor for ruining her influencer career and dragging her name through the mud. Connor snapped back at his wife, reminding her that if she had not acted like an arrogant child and poured bleach all over my blazer, none of this would have ever happened. They were trapped in a cage of their own making, turning on each other like starved animals fighting over the last scrap of meat. The next afternoon, I drove to the medical campus to meet with Dr. Sterling. We were finalizing the paperwork to officially reestablish the Helene Washington Medical Research Trust under my name. As I walked out of the administration building, I saw a sleek luxury sedan parked illegally near the crosswalk. Valerie stepped out of the back seat. She looked absolutely terrible. Her normally flawless hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and the heavy makeup on her face could not hide the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. The arrogant, cruel stepmother who had tormented me for 16 years was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, terrified woman. "Zuri, please wait!" She called out, her voice shaking slightly as she hurried across the pavement toward me. I stopped and stood perfectly still, letting her approach. I did not feel any fear. I only felt a cold, clinical curiosity. Valerie stopped a few feet away, clutching a designer handbag tightly against her chest. She looked around the campus nervously before reaching into her bag. She pulled out a crisp cashier check and held it out toward me. Her hands were visibly trembling. "I want to make things right, Zuri," she pleaded, forcing a pathetic smile onto her face. "Your father and I have talked about it, and we realize we made some terrible mistakes. We were just trying to protect the family legacy, and we got carried away. Please take this. It is $500,000. We can transfer another $500,000 by tomorrow morning. You can drop these ridiculous federal complaints, and we can all just be a real family again. I promise things will be different from now on." I looked down at the piece of paper, $1 million of hush money to buy my silence and save them from federal prison. I slowly looked back up into her desperate eyes. My voice was incredibly calm and perfectly measured as I began to dissect her entire existence. "You do not want a family, Valerie," I told her, stepping slightly closer so she had to look directly into my eyes. "You just want to save your mansion and your country club membership. You dyed my mother's white blazer pitch black because you could not stand the thought of a brilliant black woman succeeding where you failed. You treated me like a servant in my own home because seeing my face every day reminded you that your entire life was funded by a dead woman's genius. You let Jada pour bleach on me, and you tried to extort my silence for $1,000. You do not love me. You never loved me. You are just terrified because you finally realize you picked a fight with someone much smarter than you." Valerie let out a broken sob, trying to push the check closer to me. "Please, Zuri," she begged, her facade completely crumbling right there on the sidewalk. "They are going to take the house. Desmond is facing 10 years in minimum security. You cannot do this to us." "I can, and I am," I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Keep your money, Valerie. You are going to need every single penny to pay for your defense lawyers and to load up your commissary account when the judge sends you to federal prison. Do not ever approach me again." I turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her crying openly on the concrete path. I felt a profound weight lift off my chest. The little girl who used to hide in her drafty bedroom hoping for a scrap of affection was dead. I was Helene Washington's daughter, and I was finally taking my power back. While Valerie was begging for mercy on a sidewalk, Connor Pierce was back at the Nova Health headquarters, making the worst mistake of his entire miserable life. Malik and his team were monitoring Connor's digital footprint in real time. The young, arrogant tech founder was completely isolated. Desmond had legally severed all ties with him, and Jada had immediately filed for an emergency separation to distance her social media assets from his upcoming criminal trial. Connor knew the Securities and Exchange Commission was going to freeze every single bank account tied to his name within the next 24 hours. He was absolutely terrified of going to prison and losing his luxurious lifestyle. Malik called me that evening while I was sitting in my penthouse reading through medical school admission requirements. "Connor is making his move," Malik said, his deep voice practically vibrating with excitement. "He is trying to liquidate his founder shares. He knows the algorithm is stolen, and he knows the company is essentially worthless. But the public markets do not know that yet. He is using an encrypted virtual private network to try and quietly sell his 70% stake in Nova Health to an offshore buyer before the federal freeze order hits the banks." "Can he actually do that?" I asked, setting my paperwork down on the coffee table. "If he moves the money offshore, we might never see it again." Malik let out a dark, terrifying laugh. Normally, yes, an offshore wire transfer would be a massive headache for the feds to track down. But Connor is not nearly as smart as he thinks he is. He went looking for a shady investment firm in the Cayman Islands, willing to buy toxic assets, no questions asked. He found a firm called Apex Global Holdings. They offered to wire him $12 million in untraceable cryptocurrency in exchange for his complete founder stake. I watched the live monitoring software on my laptop screen as Malik walked me through the transaction. Connor was sitting alone in his dark office typing frantically on his keyboard. He initiated the massive transfer signing over all his voting rights and equity to this unknown offshore entity. He bypassed every internal corporate safeguard and ignored all standard legal compliance protocols in his desperation to get the cash out of the country. The progress bar on Malik's screen hit 100%. The digital signatures were verified and the transaction was officially logged into the global banking ledger. "I did it," Malik said softly. "The transfer is complete. Connor just sold his entire stolen company." On the surveillance feed we watched Connor lean back in his expensive leather chair. He let out a massive sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He actually thought he had won. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of expensive whiskey, pouring himself a large glass to celebrate his supposed genius. He thought he had outsmarted the federal government, the medical board, and the sister-in-law he had mocked just a few days prior. He raised his glass to the empty room, toasting his own survival. Then his private encrypted cell phone began to ring. Connor frowned, staring at the screen. It was an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering, bringing the phone to his ear with a smug, confident expression. I sat in my penthouse listening to the intercepted audio feed as Malik spoke directly to the man who had tried to destroy my future. "Good evening, Connor." Malik said, his voice smooth, professional, and completely devoid of mercy. "I hope you are enjoying that glass of whiskey, because it is probably the last decent drink you will have for a very long time." Connor froze, his hand tightening around the glass. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. "How did you get this secure number?" "My name is Malik, and I represent Zuri, Washington. But right now I am calling you as a courtesy on behalf of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I just wanted to congratulate you on the successful sale of your founder shares to Apex Global Holdings." Connor went pale, dropping the glass of whiskey onto his desk. The amber liquid spilled everywhere, soaking into his paperwork. "How do you know about Apex Global?" he choked out, panic completely taking over his voice. Malik chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that spelled absolute doom for Connor Pierce. "Because Connor, Apex Global Holdings is not a shady investment firm in the Cayman Islands. It is a dummy corporation set up by the federal government specifically designed to catch arrogant amateur criminals who try to hide stolen assets. You did not just sell stolen intellectual property, Connor. You just committed textbook wire fraud and international money laundering across a federal sting operation network. You just handed the FBI the exact evidence they need to put you away for 20 years. Do not bother running, Connor. The agents are already in your lobby." The line went dead. I watched the silent video feed as the door to Connor's office burst open and 4 agents wearing tactical jackets swarmed into the room. Connor dropped to his knees, raising his hands above his head, his entire fake empire collapsing into dust exactly where it belonged. The federal agents swarming into Connor's office should have been the definitive end of his fraudulent career. But wealthy men with desperate families often find temporary ways to delay their inevitable destruction. Malik and Special Agent Harris had orchestrated the raid perfectly, but they knew Desmond would throw his remaining liquid assets at a team of high-priced defense attorneys. By the very next morning, Connor was out on bail. Desmond and Valerie had convinced themselves in their social circle that the sudden arrest was merely a minor regulatory misunderstanding regarding overseas tax compliance. Their sheer arrogance blinded them to the reality of the federal snare closing tightly around their throats. Connor was a nervous wreck, pacing the floors of the Buckhead mansion, sweating through his designer shirts. But Desmond was unrelenting. My father demanded that Connor proceed with his scheduled appearance at the National Medical Innovation Gala. Desmond desperately needed Connor to deliver his keynote presentation and secure a massive pending government contract. That contract was the only thing that could potentially generate enough capital to cover their rapidly mounting legal fees and save their public image. Jada was equally delusional. The week of the gala, she ramped up her fake wellness influencer persona to sickening levels. She posted daily videos to her millions of followers crying softly into the camera while sitting in her luxurious closet. She painted herself as a persecuted saint, claiming the media and jealous relatives were trying to tear down her brilliant husband. She was scheduled to receive a highly prestigious Philanthropist of the Year award at the gala, a sickening irony, considering she had essentially purchased the nomination using the stolen funds from my mother's trust. Jada spent hours documenting her dress fittings and makeup trials, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire world was built on a foundation of stolen code and forged death certificates. She honestly believed that walking the red carpet and holding a shiny trophy would magically erase the federal indictments looming over her family. While they were busy playing dress up and rehearsing their lies, I was preparing for a very different kind of debut. I took the bleached, ruined blazer from my closet and brought it to a master tailor in downtown Atlanta. He was a meticulous older man who listened quietly as I explained the history of the garment. I told him how my stepmother Valerie had maliciously dyed the beautiful white fabric pitch black to hide my biological mother's legacy. I told him how Jada had poured industrial bleach over it, trying to humiliate me before my medical school interview. The tailor treated the blazer with absolute profound reverence. He understood the deep emotional weight of what he was being asked to do. He spent 3 entire days working meticulously on the garment. He carefully neutralized and stripped away the very last lingering traces of Valerie's toxic black dye. He reconstructed the damaged fibers, restoring the structural integrity of the fabric. He tailored the silhouette, bringing in the waist and adjusting the shoulders so it fit my frame perfectly. When I finally went to pick it up, I was completely speechless. The jacket had been transformed into a striking, pristine white masterpiece. The cheap black disguise was gone forever. The silver embroidery over the left breast pocket, reading the Helene Washington Medical Research Trust, gleamed brilliantly under the lights. It was no longer a ruined piece of clothing. It was a suit of armor forged from my mother's genius and my own relentless survival. Back at my secure penthouse, Malik was putting the final devastating touches on our legal strategy. The criminal case against Connor and Desmond was already airtight, but Malik was a man who believed in total absolute destruction. He wanted to strip them of everything they had ever stolen down to the last cent. He had spent the entire week working parallel on a massive civil suit to reclaim my stolen assets. On the Thursday evening before the gala, Malik walked into my living room carrying a thick stack of court-stamped documents. He dropped them onto the glass coffee table with a heavy, satisfying thud. A federal judge had just reviewed the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence we had submitted. The judge signed an immediate emergency injunction, effectively stripping Connor of all intellectual property rights to the diagnostic algorithm. The court officially and legally returned the complete ownership of the software and the patents to my name. The most beautiful part of Malik's strategy was the timing. The judge had sealed the order and timed its execution for the exact night of the gala. Connor was going to stand on a stage in front of thousands of medical professionals and government officials trying to sell a product that the federal court had already legally transferred back to me. The days leading up to the gala felt like the quiet, heavy stillness right before a massive hurricane makes landfall. I spent my time working closely with Dr. Sterling, refining my understanding of the algorithm's deep architecture. My mother had designed the software to predict autoimmune failures, but I had studied her developer notes so intensely that I knew exactly how to trigger the dormant logic bug I had planted in the code during my infiltration of Connor's office. Dr. Sterling was instrumental in securing my access to the gala. As the dean of one of the most prestigious medical institutions and a highly respected voice in the scientific community, his word was absolute law. He ensured that my name was placed on the exclusive, extremely restricted VIP guest list. My father and Valerie had spent a fortune trying to secure a table near the front of the ballroom, completely unaware that the daughter they had declared legally dead was going to be sitting just a few yards away as the honored guest of the keynote speaker's sponsor. The evening of the gala arrived crisp and clear. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my penthouse, wearing my mother's restored white blazer over a simple, elegant black dress. My hair was pulled back, my posture was straight, and my eyes held a cold, unwavering determination. Malik arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, looking incredibly sharp in a tailored tuxedo. He handed me a small, sleek earpiece, syncing it to the secure communication network his team had established. We rode the private elevator down to the parking garage and stepped into a heavily armored black SUV. The drive through the neon-lit streets of Atlanta felt surreal. For 26 years, I had been the family scapegoat, the exhausted medical scribe forced to clean up after Jada and endure Desmond's cruel insults. Tonight I was the executioner. The SUV pulled up smoothly to the curb, parking discreetly across the street from the grand ballroom venue. Through the tinted windows, I could see the flashing lights of the paparazzi cameras and the long red carpet leading up to the entrance. Wealthy socialites, medical innovators, and government officials were pouring out of luxury vehicles dressed in their finest evening wear. Malik reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a glossy copy of a major national business magazine that had been published that very morning. He handed it to me without saying a word. I looked down at the cover and felt a sharp, bitter laugh escape my lips. There, taking up the entire front page, was a high-definition portrait of my father, Desmond. He was sitting in his plush leather office chair wearing his custom suit, looking incredibly smug and self-important. The bold headline across the bottom of the page read, "Building an Impeccable Family Legacy. How Desmond Washington Shaped the Future of Medical Technology." I opened the magazine and skimmed through the featured article. Desmond spent 4 entire pages boasting about his visionary leadership, his brilliant son-in-law, Connor, and his perfect philanthropic daughter, Jada. He spun an elaborate, disgusting fairy tale about how he had fostered a culture of innovation and excellence within his family, leading directly to the creation of the Nova Health algorithm. He painted himself as a patriarch of unparalleled integrity, claiming his greatest achievement was the unshakable bond and pristine reputation of the Washington name. He did not mention my biological mother, Dr. Helene Washington, once. He certainly did not mention the daughter he had erased from existence to steal her fortune. I closed the magazine and tossed it onto the empty leather seat beside me. I looked out the tinted window, watching my father, Valerie, Jada, and a visibly sweating Connor step out of a limousine and begin walking down the red carpet, waving to the cameras like royalty. They truly believed they had weathered the storm. They thought their lies and stolen money would protect them forever. I reached up and smoothed the lapels of my mother's pristine white blazer, the silver embroidery catching the ambient light of the city. I looked at Malik, who gave me a slow, confirming nod. It was time. I placed my hand on the door handle, entirely ready to step out into the flashing lights and tear their impeccable family legacy straight to the cold, hard ground. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air conditioning of the secure SUV calm my racing pulse. Outside the tinted windows, the National Medical Innovation Gala was in full swing. It was a scene of absolute grotesque excess. The red carpet stretched up the wide marble stairs of the venue, flanked by thick velvet ropes and dozens of flashing cameras. My father, Desmond, walked right at the front of the pack. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than my entire medical scribe salary for the year. Valerie clung tightly to his arm, draped in heavy diamonds that were bought with my mother's stolen genius. Jada trailed slightly behind them, making sure she was the absolute center of attention. She paused every few steps to strike a practiced pose for the paparazzi, tossing her long hair and smiling her fake influencer smile. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom, completely unaware that her throne was built on a foundation of sand and endless lies. Malik tapped his earpiece, listening to the encrypted federal channel. "Dr. Sterling is pulling up right behind us," he murmured, his voice smooth and steady. "It is time to go, Zuri." The heavy door of the SUV swung open, and the chaotic roar of the gala hit me like a physical wave. The shouting reporters, the clicking cameras, the loud murmur of the wealthy elite, all of it blended into a deafening symphony of high society. I stepped out onto the pavement, my dark heels clicking firmly against the concrete. The evening air was sharp, but I did not feel the cold. I felt the heavy protective weight of my mother's restored white blazer resting perfectly on my shoulders. The silver embroidery over my heart seemed to catch every single flash of the cameras, glowing like a beacon of absolute truth in a sea of corporate deception. A sleek silver town car pulled up directly in front of us. The back door opened, and Dr. Sterling stepped out. He was a man who commanded absolute respect without ever having to raise his voice. He wore a classic tuxedo and an expression of grim, unwavering determination. As the dean of the most prestigious medical institution in the country, his presence at the gala was a massive event in itself. The paparazzi immediately turned their heavy lenses toward him, shouting his name and asking for a statement about the future of medical technology. Dr. Sterling ignored all of them. He walked straight over to me and offered me his arm. "Are you ready to reclaim your legacy, Miss Washington?" He asked, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear it. I slipped my arm through his and nodded, holding my head high. "I have been ready my entire life," I replied. We stepped onto the red carpet together. The soft velvet yielded beneath my shoes, but my steps were incredibly firm. As we walked, the sea of reporters and photographers began to part for Dr. Sterling out of pure professional respect. Then they noticed me. They noticed the striking young black woman walking arm in arm with the legendary dean. They noticed the pristine white blazer and the intricate silver embroidery gleaming on my chest. The whispers started almost immediately. A ripple of confusion and intense curiosity spread through the eager crowd. People began asking each other who I was and what the logo meant, and why I was walking with the dean. The inquiries buzzed in the air like a swarm of angry bees. Up ahead near the grand glass entrance doors, my family was still basking in the warm glow of the cameras. Jada was in the middle of answering a question from a lifestyle reporter, bragging loudly about how her husband's brilliant mind was going to change the world forever. Then Desmond happened to glance over his shoulder. I watched the exact beautiful moment his brain processed what his eyes were seeing. He froze completely. The charming, arrogant smile melted off his face, leaving behind a mask of absolute sheer terror. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked like an animated corpse. He grabbed Valerie's arm, his thick fingers digging deeply into her expensive silk gown. Valerie turned angrily to see what had frightened him, and her reaction was even more dramatic. She let out a choked, desperate gasp, taking a stumbling step backward. Her eyes were wide and frantic, locked entirely on the white blazer she had tried so maliciously to destroy 16 years ago. Jada finally noticed that the cameras were no longer focused on her perfect angles. She turned around, irritated by the sudden shift in attention. When she saw me standing there on the red carpet, her face contorted into a mask of ugly, unhinged rage. She did not see my mother's grand legacy returning to claim its rightful place. She only saw the half-sister she deeply despised stealing her spotlight on the most important night of her life. She completely lost whatever fragile composure she had left. Jada marched right past the velvet ropes, aggressively pushing a photographer out of her way. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "What the hell are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You are not invited. You do not belong here." She turned wildly toward the massive venue security guards who were standing near the entrance. "Get her out of here!" Jada screamed, waving her arms frantically. "She is a stalker. She is my mentally unstable sister who has been harassing my family. She is a disgruntled medical scribe trying to ruin my husband's event. Remove her right now before I call the police." Two large security guards started to move toward me, looking highly confused but ready to follow the loud orders of a wealthy, influential guest. Before they could take more than 3 heavy steps, Dr. Sterling stepped deliberately in front of me, shielding me with his own body. He raised one hand, and the simple, authoritative gesture stopped the seasoned guards dead in their tracks. The entire red carpet went completely dead silent. The reporters stopped shouting their questions. The photographers lowered their heavy cameras. Everyone was watching the legendary Dean of Medicine directly confront the hysterical internet influencer. "Step back right now, young woman," Dr. Sterling said, his voice booming across the red carpet with devastating authority. You will not lay a single hand on my honored guest. Jada looked like she had just been slapped across the face with a brick. She stood there opening and closing her mouth, unable to comprehend why the most important man at the gala was actively defending her useless scapegoat sister. Desmond finally found his voice, stepping forward with his hands raised in a pathetic, sweating attempt to pacify the powerful dean. Dr. Sterling, there must be some terrible misunderstanding, Desmond stammered, sweating profusely under the bright overhead lights. This is a private family matter. My daughter Jada is just concerned for our physical safety. Zuri is deeply unwell. Dr. Sterling let out a cold, sharp laugh that sent actual shivers down my spine. Do not insult my intelligence, Desmond, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet night air. There is no misunderstanding here. The only disease in this family is your staggering pathological greed. The seasoned reporters instantly recognized that a massive, unprecedented scandal was breaking right in front of them. They leaned forward, holding their recording devices closer, their eyes wide with hungry anticipation. Dr. Sterling turned his sharp gaze to the press corps, making sure every single camera was capturing his next historical words. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, Dr. Sterling announced, his voice ringing with absolute perfect clarity. The brilliant woman you see standing before you tonight is not a stalker. She is not a disgruntled employee, and she is certainly not mentally unstable. Her name is Zuri Washington. She is the biological daughter of the late great Dr. Helene Washington, the true and original creator of the artificial intelligence diagnostic algorithm being presented here tonight. Desmond let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, backing away as if he had been physically struck in the chest. Valerie tried desperately to hide her face behind her sequined evening clutch, but the cameras were already flashing wildly, capturing her terrified, guilty expression. For 16 years, Dr. Sterling continued exposing their dark, buried secrets to the entire world. This family has perpetrated a monstrous financial fraud. Desmond Washington deliberately forged a death certificate to steal his late wife's $20 million estate and physically strip his own daughter of her rightful legal inheritance. They funneled stolen money into fake businesses and built a fraudulent social empire on the back of a brilliant black woman's life work. But the undeniable truth can only be buried for so long. Tonight, Miss Zuri Washington stands here as the sole legal heir to the Helene Washington Medical Research Trust. The white blazer she wears bears the original crest of her mother's foundation, a foundation that will be legally reclaiming every single stolen asset starting immediately. The red carpet erupted into absolute bedlam. It was a corporate feeding frenzy. Dozens of reporters started shouting, demanding questions at the exact same time, shoving heavy microphones toward Desmond and Valerie. Mr. Washington, is it true you forged a death certificate? Valerie, did you steal millions from your stepdaughter? Jada, did your husband steal his medical algorithm to secure federal funding? The flashbulbs went off like erratic strobe lights, blinding my father and stepmother. Desmond threw his thick hands up to shield his sweating face, pushing blindly through the dense crowd, trying to escape the relentless onslaught of the media. Valerie was sobbing loudly, her perfectly applied expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Jada was frozen in place, completely paralyzed, staring at me with a look of total and absolute devastation as her fake, perfect world burned to the cold concrete live on camera. I stood there, leaning comfortably on Dr. Sterling's arm, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of calm peace. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at the toxic family that had tormented me for my entire life and watched them drown in the severe consequences of their own malicious actions. They had tried to make me invisible forever, but now the whole world saw them exactly for what they were: ruthless, pathetic, greedy thieves. The same security guards who had tried to remove me just moments ago were now actively holding back the aggressive reporters, trying to protect the very people they were just ordered by Jada to defend. Malik stood near the grand entrance of the venue. His arms crossed over his chest, giving me a subtle, firm nod of deep respect. The first critical phase of our federal operation was a complete, flawless victory. The public narrative was entirely ours to control. But the true, devastating destruction was yet to come. while the lobby and the grand red carpet were descending into a total chaotic media circus, completely isolated from the outside world. The grand ballroom inside the venue remained perfectly quiet and deeply professional. Thousands of elite medical professionals, wealthy venture capitalists, and strict government officials were seated at round, elegant tables, waiting in hushed, eager anticipation for the main event. Behind the massive, heavy velvet curtains of the main stage, Connor Pierce paced nervously back and forth. He was sweating profusely through his custom-tailored designer suit, wiping his clammy forehead with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. He kept checking his expensive stolen watch, completely unaware of the devastating family drama unfolding just a few hundred feet away in the lobby. He had his sleek laptop tucked tightly under his arm, holding on to my mother's stolen code like a desperate lifeline. He took one final deep, shaky breath, adjusting his silk tie, and walked out from behind the heavy curtain, stepping into the bright, blinding spotlight of the main stage to begin his live diagnostic demonstration, completely oblivious to the fatal digital bomb waiting silently in the dark layers of his stolen software. Connor stepped into the blinding spotlight feeling like an absolute conqueror. The grand ballroom was packed to the absolute brim with over 1,000 of the most powerful people in the medical and financial industries. The thunderous applause washed over him like a warm wave of total validation. He walked confidently over to the sleek glass podium and carefully connected his expensive laptop to the main presentation feed. His hands were shaking slightly, but he told himself it was just the adrenaline of his inevitable massive success. He looked out at the vast sea of faces, completely unaware that his own personal apocalypse had just taken a seat in the very front row. I sat quietly next to Dr. Sterling, my white blazer glowing softly in the dim, elegant lighting of the audience seating area. Malik sat on my other side, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed intensely on the massive 50-foot lead screen, hovering like a dark monolith behind the main stage. Connor tapped the microphone, testing the audio before launching into his carefully rehearsed pitch. "Welcome, distinguished guests." He began, his voice echoing impressively through the cavernous space. "Tonight we are not just looking at a new software application. We are standing together on the precipice of a total medical revolution." He paced across the wide stage, projecting the calculated image of a seasoned Silicon Valley visionary. He spun a disgusting, elaborate tale about his tireless dedication and unparalleled intellect. He told the captive, wealthy audience how he had spent years locked in a dark room writing millions of lines of code completely from scratch. He claimed he had sacrificed his own health and personal relationships to solve the ultimate puzzle of autoimmune predictive modeling. Listening to his arrogant, blatant lies made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression perfectly serene and unreadable. I knew his stolen time was rapidly running out. He directed everyone to look at the massive screen behind him. Connor clicked a small button on a wireless remote, and the 50-foot display lit up with the fake polished user interface of Nova Health. It looked sleek and modern, designed specifically to dazzle venture capitalists who did not understand complex back-end architecture or actual science. For months, the medical community has relied on static historical data to guess how diseases might progress. He announced, his voice rising with fake, passionate intensity. "But tonight, I am going to show you the actual future. I am going to run a live high-capacity diagnostic simulation right here on this stage. This algorithm will analyze 10,000 complex patient profiles in real time, predicting cellular degradation with an unprecedented 99% accuracy." Investors in the front rows leaned forward eagerly in their plush seats. High-ranking government contractors whispered excitedly to their aides. The massive room was practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. Connor turned back to the glass podium, ready to cement his stolen legacy forever. He typed a few rapid commands on his laptop keyboard to initiate the live data sequence. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for all evening. He hit the enter key, expecting a beautiful, colorful diagnostic graph to appear on the 50-foot screen to amaze his wealthy audience. Instead, the massive display behind him flickered violently, letting out a strange electronic buzz before going completely pitch black. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the massive ballroom. Connor let out a nervous little chuckle, tapping the side of his laptop with his fingers. "Just a minor technical difficulty, folks," he said into the microphone, trying desperately to maintain his charming, arrogant smile. "The servers are probably just overwhelmed by the sheer unprecedented power of our processing engine. Give the system just a second to catch up." He hit the enter key again, pressing noticeably harder this time. The screen did not return to the polished fake medical interface. Instead, a single line of bright green text appeared in the top left corner of the black void. Then another line appeared, quickly followed by another. Suddenly, the entire massive 50-foot screen was filled with thousands of lines of raw, complex source code, scrolling downward at a dizzying, chaotic speed. Connor turned around to look at the screen, and his fake, confident smile instantly vanished from his face. The color drained rapidly from his cheeks as he realized exactly what he was looking at. It was not his polished diagnostic simulation. It was the deep foundational architecture of the algorithm, laid completely bare for every single software expert and medical professional in the room to analyze. The code stopped scrolling abruptly. The system automatically zoomed in on the very top section of the directory, magnifying a specific block of hidden text until it was large enough for everyone in the very back row of the ballroom to read clearly. The glowing text shifted from bright green to a blaring emergency red. The entire ballroom fell dead silent as the massive red letters burned into the retinas of 1,000 industry leaders. The text read, "Original Foundational Architecture, authored by Dr. Helene Washington and Zuri Washington." The digital timestamp located directly below the names verified that the complex code had been written and finalized an entire decade before Connor even registered his fake corporate entity. A collective shocked gasp echoed loudly through the cavernous ballroom. The heavy silence broke, instantly replaced by a rising, chaotic wave of whispers and urgent, agitated conversations. Wealthy venture capitalists, who had just been ready to hand Connor millions of dollars in federal funding, were now pointing aggressively at the screen and demanding immediate answers. Connor was breathing heavily, his chest heaving rapidly as sheer panic completely consumed his mind. He spun back to the glass podium and started slamming his sweaty fingers wildly against his laptop keyboard. He hit the escape key over and over again. He tried to force a hard reboot by holding down the power button, but my mother's hidden ghost key program had completely locked him out of the operating system. The expensive laptop was effectively a useless block of metal and plastic. Connor grabbed the microphone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it onto the stage floor. "Please do not panic, everyone," he stammered, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "Our secure system has obviously suffered a malicious cyber attack from a jealous competitor. This is a targeted digital hack to ruin our demonstration. We are working to resolve the display issue immediately. Please remain in your seats." But the massive screen behind him was nowhere near finished. The bright red text of the source code dissolved slowly, blending into a series of high-resolution scanned legal documents. The elite audience watched in absolute stunned silence as the state of Nevada death certificate for Zuri Washington appeared on the left side of the 50-foot screen. Right next to it, the screen displayed a highly magnified side-by-side comparison of Desmond Washington's notarized signature, clearly showing his approval of the fraudulent transfer of the Helene Washington Medical Research Trust. The criminal forgery was projected at 50 times its normal size, making it impossible to deny. The crowd grew significantly louder, the frantic murmurs turning into outright angry shouting. Before Connor could even attempt to stammer out a pathetic explanation for the forged legal documents, displaying his father-in-law's signature, the massive screen shifted one final time. The heavy, imposing golden seal of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission faded slowly into view, occupying the absolute center of the massive display. Bold black text materialized, ominously beneath the federal seal, outlining a formal comprehensive cease and desist order. It explicitly demanded the immediate and total halt of all Nova Health corporate operations, citing active high-level investigations into severe wire fraud, grand larceny, and international intellectual property theft. The terrifying words "federal criminal indictment" flashed aggressively across the bottom of the LED screen in bright warning colors. The elegant ballroom completely erupted into absolute unmanageable chaos. Expensive chairs scraped loudly against the polished floor as powerful billionaire investors stood up, pulling out their cell phones to desperately call their banks to cancel any pending wire transfers to Nova Health. High-ranking government officials signaled aggressively to their private security details, looking absolutely horrified that they had been publicly associated with such a massive historic criminal fraud. On the bright stage, Connor was a broken, pathetic mess. He was sobbing openly in front of 1,000 people, clawing desperately at his useless laptop, crying out into the live microphone that it was all a terrible mistake and that he was the real victim of a conspiracy. The bright theatrical stage lights illuminated the heavy sweat pouring down his pale, terrified face, ruining his expensive suit and completely destroying his arrogant tech bro persona forever. I slowly stood up from my reserved seat in the very front row. The absolute chaos swirling loudly around the grand ballroom seemed to fade into muted background noise as I focused entirely on the pathetic, fraudulent man crumbling on the stage before me. Dr. Sterling gave me a brief, deeply approving nod, while Malik sat back in his chair and watched the destruction with a deeply satisfied professional smirk. I smoothed the front of my tailored white blazer, feeling the beautiful silver embroidery resting proudly over my heart. The weight of my mother's legacy felt incredibly powerful. I walked with slow, deliberate purpose to the very edge of the stage. Right next to the front row seating was a small secondary podium, originally reserved for the panel moderators. A live microphone rested quietly in its metal stand. I reached out and grasped the cool metal of the microphone, pulling it smoothly and firmly from the holder. Connor froze completely when he saw me standing there at the edge of the stage. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with wild, desperate panic and absolute shock. His gaze dropped to my clothing. He finally recognized the pristine white blazer. He finally realized that the exhausted, overworked medical scribe he had mercilessly mocked and belittled in his living room was the brilliant, silent architect behind his entire spectacular destruction. The heavy, clear sound of my voice cutting through the venue sound system instantly silenced the frantic, shouting crowd in the front rows. The executives and investors stopped their panicked phone calls to watch the final confrontation unfold. I looked Connor dead in his terrified, bloodshot eyes, my expression completely cold and totally devoid of any mercy. If you are going to steal a black woman's genius, Connor, you should probably learn how to code first. The absolute silence that followed my words lasted only a fraction of a second before the entire grand ballroom exploded into unprecedented chaos. The sheer magnitude of the scandal had finally registered with every single person in the room. The wealthy venture capitalists who had just been preparing to write massive checks were now shouting at the top of their lungs, demanding their investment pledges be immediately voided. Prestigious medical professionals were violently pushing their heavy chairs away from the elegant tables, completely disgusted by the massive fraud they had almost publicly endorsed. The flashing lights of the press cameras turned into a blinding, continuous strobe effect, capturing the spectacular destruction of the Washington family in high definition. The elegant string quartet that had been playing softly in the background abruptly stopped, leaving only the sounds of yelling executives and breaking glass as people bumped into tables in their frantic rush to distance themselves from the stage. Up on the brightly lit platform, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on Jada. The perfect supportive influencer wife facade completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, vicious woman desperate to save her own skin. She hiked up her expensive designer gown and scrambled up the side steps of the stage, completely ignoring the chaotic crowd below. She sprinted directly toward Connor, who was still paralyzed behind the sleek glass podium. Jada did not try to comfort her husband or stand by his side. Instead, she unleashed a blood-curdling scream and began violently slapping her hands against his chest. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unhinged panic. "You lied to me, Connor. You told me you wrote the code. You ruined my brand. You ruined my entire life." She hit him again and again, pushing him backward while crying, massive theatrical tears, trying desperately to perform for the cameras and frame herself as the ultimate victim of his deception. Connor just stood there absorbing her frantic blows, looking completely hollowed out, He did not even try to defend himself against her scratching nails. He was staring blankly at the massive LED screen above them, still displaying the glaring red text of the federal cease and desist order. While Jada was performing her hysterical betrayal narrative, I noticed a sudden subtle movement out of the corner of my eye. My father Desmond was abandoning ship. The patriarch, who had just spent 4 pages in a national magazine bragging about his impeccable family loyalty, was quietly backing away from his screaming daughter and his disgraced son-in-law. Desmond kept his head down, avoiding the flashing cameras, inching his way toward the heavy velvet curtains that concealed the venue-side exit. He thought he could just slip away into the dark Atlanta night, access his hidden offshore accounts, and let Connor take the entire massive fall for the criminal enterprise. He did not make it. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom were thrown open with a violent, deafening crash that echoed over the shouting crowd. A massive wave of men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers with bright yellow FBI letters printed on the back flooded into the elegant space. Right behind them marched a team of sharp-suited federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They moved with absolute terrifying military precision, completely ignoring the wealthy shouting guests as they fanned out across the massive room, blocking every single possible exit. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man, raised a heavy black bullhorn to his mouth. "Federal agents, nobody move," he commanded, his voice carrying a dark, unquestionable authority that immediately froze the entire frantic room in place. 2 heavily armed agents sprinted directly up the center aisle, bounding up the stage stairs in a matter of seconds. They grabbed Connor by his expensive tailored suit, roughly spinning him around and shoving him face first against the sleek glass podium. Jada screamed and scrambled backward, tripping over her own high heels and falling hard onto the wooden stage floor as the agents pulled Connor's arms tightly behind his back. The sharp, heavy click of steel handcuffs echoing loudly through the live microphone on the podium sounded like the ultimate final judgment. "Connor Pierce, you are under arrest for wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and international money laundering," the lead agent stated firmly, reading him his rights while dragging his limp, terrified body forcefully toward the stairs. At the exact same moment, a separate tactical team intercepted my father. Desmond had his sweaty hand resting heavily on the brass push bar of the emergency exit door when 3 federal agents surrounded him, instantly blocking his only path to freedom. Desmond threw his hands up in the air, his face a mask of sweating, terrified cowardice. "There is a terrible misunderstanding," he stammered loudly, his voice trembling as the wealthy investors he had tried so hard to impress watched his complete public humiliation. "I am simply a quiet investor. I had absolutely no knowledge of my son-in-law's criminal operations." The lead Sikh investigator stepped forward, pulling a folded federal warrant from his interior jacket pocket. "Desmond Washington, you are under arrest for federal document forgery, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy to defraud a legal trust," the investigator announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent side of the ballroom. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back right now." The mighty Desmond Washington, the arrogant man who had erased my entire existence to steal my mother's fortune, was violently shoved against the heavy exit door and handcuffed in front of the entire elite medical community. The relentless flashes of the press cameras captured every single angle of his pathetic, cowardly defeat. Down in the front row, Valerie watched her wealthy husband and her golden son-in-law being dragged away by federal authorities. Her luxurious world was collapsing into absolute ash right in front of her eyes. The massive mansion, the elite country club memberships, the stolen diamonds. It was all gone in a matter of minutes. Total, overwhelming panic set into her mind, and she did the only thing she could think of to save herself. She turned her desperate, terrified eyes toward me. Valerie stumbled across the carpeted floor, pushing past the stunned executives until she reached the edge of the stage where I was standing. The cruel, manipulative woman who had dyed my mother's blazer, pitch black, and treated me like garbage for 16 years, fell directly to her knees, right in front of my feet. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately clutching at the fabric of my dark slacks. "Zuri, please," She sobbed, her voice a pathetic broken whine that echoed in the quiet space. Please, you have to tell them to stop this right now. Tell them it is just a big family misunderstanding. We can fix this, Zuri. We can give you whatever you want. We can give you the house and the cars. We are your family. Please do not let them do this to us. I looked down at my stepmother. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel any sympathy or any lingering familial obligation. I looked at the dark streaks of expensive mascara running down her ruined face, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clean, beautiful justice. I slowly reached down and firmly pried her shaking fingers off my clothing, smoothing the dark fabric where her desperate hands had touched me. I stood tall, letting the brilliant white fabric of my mother's blazer catch the bright stage lights. I looked down into Valerie's terrified, desperate eyes, making sure she heard every single syllable of my response. Stop making a scene, Valerie, I said, my voice perfectly smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. You are embarrassing the family. Valerie let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail, collapsing completely onto the carpeted floor as two female FBI agents approached from behind to pull her away for aggressive federal questioning. Up on the main stage, Jada was still sitting on the hard wooden floor. Her expensive designer dress ruined her fake influencer composure, completely and permanently destroyed. She was crying hysterically, watching Connor being marched out the back doors in heavy steel chains. She frantically dug her trembling hands into her designer clutch and pulled out her latest model smartphone. She was utterly desperate to call her crisis management PR team to try and salvage whatever was left of her lucrative online wellness brand. Her fingers shook violently as she unlocked the bright screen and opened her mobile banking application, trying to see if she still had enough liquid cash to hire a premier white-collar defense attorney for herself. Malik stepped calmly away from my side and walked slowly up the short wooden stairs onto the main stage. He moved with the relaxed, confident swagger of an apex predator who had just finished a very satisfying meal. He looked down at Jada, his expensive custom shoes stopping just inches from her trembling hands. Jada looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen, clutching her cell phone to her chest like a protective shield. "Who the hell are you?" she sobbed aggressively, trying to maintain some tiny, pathetic shred of her typical arrogant entitlement. "Get away from me. I need to call my bank right now." Malik offered her a slow, terrifying smile, crossing his arms comfortably over his chest. "I would not bother making that phone call. Jada," he said, his voice completely calm, but carrying a heavy, devastating weight that made her flinch. As the primary beneficiary of a fraudulent estate and an active co-conspirator in a federal wire fraud investigation, the government tends to act very quickly to secure any stolen capital. Jada stared at him, her face completely blank with confusion and rising panic. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, staring down at the endless loading screen of her banking application. Malik leaned down slightly, delivering the final absolute death blow to her entire fake existence. "I am talking about the federal mandate that was signed by a judge 20 minutes ago," he explained smoothly, his words cutting through her denial like a surgical blade. "Every single bank account tied to your name or your social security number has been completely frozen. Your platinum credit cards are currently useless pieces of plastic. The Securities and Exchange Commission has already contacted your social media platforms and secured a total immediate freeze on all your digital monetization and lucrative brand sponsorships. They are currently sending agents to seize the Buckhead mansion, the luxury vehicles, and the hidden offshore accounts. You do not have a PR team anymore, Jada. You do not have a wellness brand. You do not have a single dime to your name. You are completely destitute." Jada stared at her phone screen as it turned black, mirroring the absolute void of her new reality. The federal mandate had acted with swift, devastating precision. 3 months passed since the night the government shattered the Washington family facade into a million unrecoverable pieces. The sheer speed of their total destruction was breathtaking to witness. The legal system, which wealthy people usually use as a shield, became a relentless, heavy hammer that crushed every single lie they had ever told. Connor Pierce, the arrogant tech bro, who thought he could steal the genius of a dead woman, stood trembling before a federal judge. His expensive custom suits were replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his shrinking, terrified frame. The judge showed absolutely no mercy during the sentencing hearing, pointing out the extreme malicious nature of the wire fraud and the deliberate exploitation of intellectual property. The judge handed Connor a massive sentence in a federal penitentiary. There were no country club prisons for him. He was sent to a high-security facility completely stripped of his electronics, his luxury, and his arrogant pride. My father Desmond fared no better. The mighty patriarch who cared only about his impeccable public image completely folded under the crushing weight of the federal evidence Malik and the FBI had compiled against him. Facing decades in prison for identity theft, criminal forgery, and conspiracy to defraud a legal trust, Desmond took a cowardly plea deal. He accepted a heavy prison sentence, hoping to avoid the public humiliation of a prolonged trial, but the damage was already permanently done. The national business magazines that had once praised him now ran massive exposed pieces detailing his spectacular, disgraceful fall from grace. His wealthy friends and country club associates abandoned him instantly, pretending they had never even known him. He was transferred to a federal facility, his legacy completely and utterly destroyed by his own staggering pathological greed. With the primary architects of the fraud locked away behind concrete and steel, the crushing financial reality finally caught up to Valerie and Jada. The massive Buckhead mansion was immediately seized by the federal government and foreclosed by the banks. The luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobes, the expensive jewelry, all of it was confiscated to pay back the millions of dollars in restitution and mounting legal fees. Jada and Valerie were violently thrown out into the cold, unforgiving reality of the real world. Stripped of their stolen wealth, they were forced to rent a tiny, run-down two-bedroom apartment in a neglected neighborhood far outside the city perimeter. Malik kept tabs on them, reporting their pathetic new living conditions to me during our weekly briefings. Valerie, the woman who used to torment me for wearing cheap clothes, was now working exhausting shifts as a cashier at a local discount grocery store. The dark, heavy circles under her eyes were permanent now, and her hands were rough and calloused from handling cheap merchandise all day long. Jada suffered an equally poetic fate. Without her stolen money to fund her fake wellness influencer lifestyle, she became completely irrelevant. Her millions of followers vanished overnight, moving on to the next shiny internet personality. Desperate to pay the aggressive lawyers who were hounding them for retainer fees, Jada was forced to take a minimum wage job working the drive-through window at a fast food restaurant. The irony was absolutely exquisite. The golden child who had poured industrial bleach on my only professional blazer was now forced to wear a cheap polyester uniform, smelling of stale grease and fryer oil every single day of her miserable life. Despite their total ruin, their sheer audacity remained fully intact. 3 months into their new miserable existence, Malik received a desperate formal request from their court-appointed public defender. Valerie and Jada were begging for a brief sit-down meeting with me. They claimed they were on the verge of total homelessness and wanted to appeal to my sense of family loyalty for a tiny fraction of the trust fund. Malik advised against it, but I wanted to look them in the eyes one last time. I wanted them to see exactly who they had tried to destroy. I agreed to the meeting on my own strict terms. They were directed to come to the new corporate headquarters of the Helene Washington Medical Research Trust. The office was a sprawling modern masterpiece of glass and light, occupying the entire top floor of a premium downtown high-rise. When Valerie and Jada stepped off the private elevator, they looked incredibly small and thoroughly defeated. Their clothes were worn and outdated, their shoulders slumped with the heavy burden of their new poverty. They walked into my massive corner office, staring in awe at the stunning panoramic views of the city skyline. I sat behind a sleek, beautiful mahogany desk, wearing a sharply tailored dark suit. Malik stood silently by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, his arms crossed over his chest like a loyal guardian. Valerie and Jada sat down tentatively in the plush leather chairs across from me. Neither of them could maintain eye contact. Valerie twisted her rough hands together in her lap, taking a deep, shaky breath before speaking. "Zuri," she began, her voice entirely stripped of its former venomous arrogance, "we know we have no right to ask you for anything. We know what we did was unforgivable. But we are drowning, Zuri. The legal fees have taken everything we have left. We cannot afford to pay our rent next month, and Jada is struggling to buy groceries. Jada finally looked up, her eyes red and pleading. Please, Zuri, she whispered, her voice cracking pathetically. You have billions of dollars now. You have the whole world at your feet. We are just asking for a tiny monthly stipend. Just a few $1,000s a month so we do not end up sleeping on the streets. We are still your family deep down. Please have some mercy on us. I sat perfectly still listening to their pathetic begging. I looked at the two women who had made my life a living nightmare for 16 long years. They were not sorry for the emotional abuse or the financial theft. They were only sorry that they had been caught and stripped of their unearned luxury. I slowly reached into the top drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a thick, crisp stack of legal papers. I placed the document flat on the smooth surface of the desk and slid it slowly across the wood until it rested directly in front of Valerie and Jada. They looked down at the paper, confusion written clearly across their exhausted faces. They recognized the dense legal jargon immediately. It was the exact same 20-page minor family liability waiver and non-disclosure agreement that Valerie had tossed onto the coffee table at the mansion just 3 months ago. It was the document they had used to try and extort my silence for a miserable $1,000, threatening to cancel my health insurance and throw me out on the street if I refused to comply. I looked Valerie dead in her terrified, desperate eyes, keeping my voice incredibly cold and perfectly measured. Sorry, I said, the absolute finality of my words echoing cleanly in the spacious executive office. According to this document you forced me to sign, I have no legal obligation to you. Valerie let out a quiet, broken sob, covering her face with her rough hands, as the absolute devastating reality of her situation finally set in completely. Jada stared blankly at my signature on the bottom of the page, realizing that the very trap they had set to destroy me had become the iron cage that would lock them in poverty for the rest of their miserable lives. I did not say another word. I simply looked at Malik, who nodded and pressed a button on his phone. Two large professional security guards stepped quietly into the office, standing behind the chairs. My business here is concluded, I told the guards. Please escort these two women out of my building and ensure they are permanently added to the security blacklist. Valerie and Jada did not fight back. They stood up on trembling legs, completely hollowed out and broken beyond repair. They walked slowly out of my beautiful office, disappearing behind the heavy glass doors forever. The toxic, destructive chapter of my past was finally and permanently closed. The rest of that beautiful morning was dedicated to pure, joyful rebirth. Later that afternoon, I held a massive press conference in the grand lobby of the building, officially and publicly relaunching the Helene Washington Medical Research Trust. The foundation was fully funded and entirely dedicated to supporting groundbreaking artificial intelligence diagnostics and providing full-ride academic scholarships for brilliant underprivileged Black women in the medical field. The brilliant legacy of my mother was no longer hidden in the dark, stolen by greedy, incompetent men. It was shining brightly for the entire world to see, saving lives and changing the future of medicine exactly as she had always intended. A few weeks later, the warm, late summer breeze swept across the stunning campus of the most prestigious medical school in the South. I walked up the wide stone steps, moving with a light, confident grace that I had never known before. I was no longer the exhausted, overworked medical scribe running on empty and hiding in the shadows of a toxic family. I was a multimillionaire chief executive officer, a philanthropist, and the top-ranking incoming student of my medical school class. I paused near the heavy oak doors of the main administration building, taking a deep, satisfying breath of the crisp morning air. I reached up and gently adjusted the lapels of the pristine white blazer my mother had left me. The beautiful silver embroidery resting proudly over my heart gleamed brilliantly in the morning sun. The industrial bleach that was meant to ruin me had ultimately set me entirely free, washing away the darkness and revealing the magnificent, unshakable truth beneath. I looked out across the sprawling, beautiful campus, a bright, genuine smile spreading across my face. My mother was walking with me, her genius flowing through my veins and protecting my every step. The painful, grueling war was finally over, and the beautiful, unshakable ultimate victory was entirely mine. The story of Zuri teaches us a powerful lesson. Our true worth is never defined by the toxic people who try to diminish us, even if they are family. When faced with manipulation and cruelty, the most effective response isn't blind anger, but quiet strategic resilience. Zuri used her intelligence to reclaim her stolen legacy, proving that sometimes the very things meant to ruin us, like bleach on a blazer, actually strip away the disguises holding us back. True justice and healing come from knowing your value, setting unbreakable boundaries, and becoming so successful that their opinions no longer matter. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below, sharing a time you turned a painful setback into a massive comeback, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more empowering stories.